Oh man, Sal, how you feeling, man? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm feeling good, man. It's a lot. These week 17s, not only 15 games, but just trying to figure out up until like tomorrow inactives, just which players are going to be in and out and really affect a lot.
Yeah, man. It's this strategy show is going to be a little bit different because first off, it's 15 games, right? It's the most games that we've ever had on one slate, and then there's the unknown of which players play, how long do they play for? Is hashtag preseason in effect with a lot of these guys that we might roster? But first, before we get into it, let's thank our wonderful sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. If you guys haven't signed up yet, I mean, I don't know, once again, if this is going to be the last week that they do it, but the NFL Baller Tournament is there. And you have $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. So go over there and sign up. Use the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, and go ahead and take advantage of that. Do you play on Yahoo, Sal?
Yeah, I do. Definitely.
It's a pretty good deal, man. I mean, for someone who is maybe newer or someone who doesn't want to play against tougher competition, Yahoo is a great foundation to start, and they kind of help you with that promo code, get 3 free entries into that tournament, and they're not bad tournaments whatsoever. So there's usually some good prize pools. I think this week is 15K up top the first. So don't miss out on that if you haven't taken advantage of that yet. But week 17, here we are. Our ownership was updated last night about 10 hours ago. For those of you who do have the Osmo tool for the ownership projections. And what we do usually on a case-by-case basis is we just look at the final thoughts of the latest ownership. We're going to go through that. And then we'll just go position by position and see kind of what plays are optimal or what plays maybe no one's on that could be part of that winning lineup in the Millie Maker. But we'll start off with DraftKings first, like we always do. Go ahead and hit the first guy. It's Ezekiel Elliott. Now has creeped up to be the number one projected overall owned player at 23.4%. At home against Washington, 8K. How do you feel about this, Sal?
Yeah, he's now the most highly owned running back and just player in the entire slate projection, at least. Yeah, I feel good about it. He would be the guy that I would want to pay up for at 8,000. Just kind of a different tier where McCaffrey's still at 10,000. Yeah, I'm fine with where the ownership's coming in. I currently am a little bit above that. It's the best run blocking advantage you'll find on a weekend. This Washington secondary, it just took more hits. Their defensive line continues to take hits, ruling guys out in week 17. So it's actually a must-win game here and needs some help from the Giants for the Cowboys to get in. So the guy's getting 23.6 opportunities per game. That's the third best. He leads the entire league in red zone rushing. And I mentioned the secondary being banged up. All their cornerbacks, their top 4 cornerbacks are not playing. They put Landon Collins out for week 17, so their best safety. That's important because it's just going to mean the Cowboys offense can get down the field into the red zone, which only helps Zeke, who does lead the league in those touches. So, yeah, at 8,000, I'll have more than the 23% as of right now. I think he's the best pay-up option.
How do you feel this offense will run come Sunday? And what I mean by that, Sal, is he had 13 rushing attempts against the Eagles. Granted, they were down and they had to pass a little bit more later in that game. But that's the second fewest attempts that he's had all season, and didn't even clip the 100 total yard mark, which I believe there was some sort of streak that he had in regards to yardage or total yards that got snapped with this previous game, as he only ended up with 84 total yards. But he did get 7 targets in that passing game and caught all 7 balls as they continued to pass. But do you feel, based on how weak the Redskins' rush defense is, could you see them really moving the ball on the ground a lot more rather than through the air?
Yeah, I think that it's going to happen a lot in just both departments. I think that on the ground they have a better advantage, but with all the bodies down for the Redskins, it's equally as good through the air. The only concern is, like, if you're playing the stacks of this team, is who do you run it back with? One, from Washington, but also 2, if you do get a big lead in the second half, it's just more Tony Pollard. We've seen them do that, and more Zeke. So I think to answer the question, I think just more, I'd want to play more Zeke or more interest in Zeke at this price tag than the Dallas stack, but both of them are in great spots.
Yeah, last week was the first time all season that Zeke didn't get one red zone look against that Eagles matchup. But other than that, I mean, he's been heavily involved when they do get into the red zone. So you mentioned Tony Pollard, though, and while we're on the topic, he's 4,800 on DraftKings. And we've seen different sides of how they utilize him in some games where he's used heavily more than others. And so if they do go up, and I mean, let's just say that they do dominate at home, What kind of, I guess, touches do you think Tony Pollard would get in that type of situation?
Yeah, so I mean, this is definitely a game as 11-point favorites, 27.75 team implied total, where he can see his touch count spike. On the year, he's just been averaging right around 5.5 carries per game. I think this is one of those games where you see that or a little bit more. But even at $4,000, it's probably not something I get to. It's more of like an extreme Millie Maker type play, just because of, we'll see what happens with Lesean McCoy, but Damian Williams is in that price range. The Baltimore guys, even Sony Michel, and you're going to get locked in a minimum from all those guys, 12 touches all the way up to 20 possibly. So with Tony Pollard, you're just hoping something goes right, and then he sees 12 to 15 touches. So at $4,000, I see the interest there, but I probably won't have any.
Dallas has the third highest run implied total on this week's slate. Next guy coming in is same division, different game, but the same type of meaning. Dallas Goddard, who shot up after the Ertz information came out yesterday about him not playing. 22.7% projected on 4,900 at tight end. Is he the best tight end selection on this slate?
Yeah, and I think he is, and it's even more interesting because like the more I think he's going to get even more highly owned than this, like 30% plus. But if that ownership keeps coming in, usually more ownership means these guys are not as great of plays, but it's hard to pass up when you just factor in, no Ertz, a huge guy in that offense now with the rib injury. Again, no Aguilar. He is the best pass catcher with Greg Ward in this offense, probably the most trusted in a good matchup, and he's 4,900. You have Kittle on the night slate. You have no Ertz because of this game or the injury directly for Goddard. And then you have an expensive in this one, Travis Kelce. So it's just a spot where he's so cheap. It's going to garner ownership. I'll have a lot more than the 20% right now. I think he's the best tight end play in the slate. It's hard to ignore and get away from unless it starts creeping into like the 40% range.
So I think those are all valid points, and I get it, and I believe that he is a great play. I do want to ask, though, with Ertz being out, do you think more concentration goes on Goddard in this situation? Because, I mean, he's had the luxury of having Ertz on opposite sides of the line, which, obviously takes a lot more attention off of him. And now with Ertz out, does any attention go towards him now, given that they know that they used him a lot in the offense?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up. Ertz was getting a lot of double teams when he was in there. I don't know how the Giants will view Goddard if he's that same type of a player or if they can just play it straight up and have one-on-ones really everywhere. It's very unique that you see a tight end. Ertz has been like the only one double teamed all season long when he's not out wide. So I think I'm going to play it straight up as if that doesn't happen. Last time we saw the Giants were one of the teams that double teamed Ertz the fewest in that game. So if we kind of try and take that into this situation, it is a concern if you get high ownership and a valid point to make if you wanted to come in under the field. I'll probably play it straight up, but I do like the point.
Just a little food for thought. 9 games this year, the Giants have held the tight end position in fantasy, scoring 5 points or less. And the one game that's the outlier that they just absolutely got dismantled was that Philadelphia Eagles game where Ertz went off in the fourth quarter and in overtime. But outside of that, though, they've been pretty good at neutralizing and containing the tight end position. But once again, he probably will be heavily target. And at that price point, given amount of how many shares he'll look at, because of how depleted this wide receiver core is, it's really hard to take your finger off of Dallas Goddard. But I will say that does take the attention off of Tyler Higbee. Now, he's not up here in ownership, but while we're on the topic of tight end, what are your thoughts on Tyler Higbee with the matchup and really just the amount of production he's had over the last 3 or 4 weeks?
Yeah, I like Higbee. I mean, the only concern for Higbee, and he's like half the ownership right now as Goddard. The only concern for Higbee is what happens with Jared Goff and this team in general. McVay, earlier in the week, he hinted that starters could be rested in this one. He already ruled out Jalen Ramsey on the defensive side and some other defensive linemen. So there's a chance that you probably don't get Todd Gurley for the full game and Cooks if anybody was to sit due to their just injuries and limitations all year. I think Higbee's somebody who stays in. The downside would be if you didn't have Goff stay in because that directly impacts Higbee's production. So the 11% ownership, I was discussing this earlier, I think that it's a spot where I'm okay getting to it because I think it's already built into it. The risk of him maybe sitting out, if you got 10% of Higbee and match the field, it's not really crushing your lineups if he only plays 3 quarters as a tight end. He's priced up to 5,600. I think I prefer Austin Hooper right around him, but Hooper, Goddard, Higbee, those would be my favorite tight end plays. And at that ownership, I think it's in this matchup really fine to go to, even if he sat out a quarter or Goff sat out the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I think people were concerned about Gerald Everett getting back into the offense, into the mix, the passing game, and that clearly didn't stop Jared Goff from really seeking his new one of his new uh, priorities in the offense, and Tyler Higbee. So if he does play the entire game, I mean, this could be a great play. And if ownership is 10% or less, I mean, obviously he's only a $700 more than Goddard. It could be a nice optimal play as far as a GBP is concerned. Next guy that kind of shot up, I don't remember seeing him yesterday on the show at Manny anywhere here at the top in ownership, but DeAndre Washington, 5,200 at Denver this weekend, 21.2%. Let's go ahead and break this down. Do you know why he's kind of shot up here in the projections as far as ownership?
Yeah, so I guess my assumption would be Friday we got news that Josh Jacobs would be ruled doubtful. It was pretty much all week long that he was going to be doubtful. Like they said, there's a chance he could play, so that seems like he's going to be doubtful. But he was officially ruled doubtful for the game. So I assume, if anything, that's where DeAndre Washington's love came from. So it's an interesting spot. He's the third highest owned player in the slate as a running back. We do have some value at running back this week in that 4K range. I think there's probably 4 or 5 names you can get to and think that they can be in a tournament winning lineup. In 2 games without Josh Jacobs, you've had Washington go for 45 total touches for 202 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's been great. He's been using the passing game, 8 receptions in those 2 games. But now you get Denver's number 1 ranked run defense. He's a 3.5-point road dog. So his price is all the way up to 5,200 now. I think that there's good fade opportunities here. And I think there's decent pivots in guys like Sony Michel and maybe even some of those Baltimore running backs. So I think he's fine at 5,200. I won't have that much of him. I'll probably come in somewhere around 10-15%.
Yeah, he had 25 touches last week against the Chargers. And I mean, obviously at that price point, it's hard to shy away from someone who's getting that many touches. And if he's projected to get that many touches this week, maybe I can see why ownership is there. But I think you mentioned it as well. This number 1 rated defense as far as the rushing for Denver in Denver could be a little bit more difficult. If this was in Oakland, I could say, okay, maybe we can consider it a little bit more. But I do like the fade call here. I'm not really too keen on DeAndre Washington. I think there are other guys here at the running back position that we'll get into, like Sony Michel, like Damian Williams, and even a Ronald Jones, who are less than DeAndre Washington, who all 3 are heavily involved in the offense over the last couple of weeks. So I think we can fade in this situation, in my opinion, or at least not have as much shares. I'm just not really on him as maybe compared to the field at this point. Our next guy, though, is someone who is really hard to ignore any other time. Christian McCaffrey, 10K, coming in at home against New Orleans, 19.8%. I mean, let's just be honest here. We can't fade him, man. I mean, he's just such a volume machine. And now with Greer in the offense, and DJ Moore out, it's like, how much more usage now does Christian McCaffrey get?
Yeah, and you also can throw in some coach speak and narratives of him chasing all these records right now, single season records for scrimmage yards. He needs I think 215. So there's a lot of records out there that he's chasing, and the coaches are aware of that. And they said in a press conference that they're aware of that, and he will continue to be the priority, which he always is. So maybe instead of getting a 25 touch game, you get the 28, 30 touch game here in the final game of the season. I don't think it would be like last year where there was somewhat of an injury he was dealing with. In the week 17 game, he played the first quarter and then never stepped back on the field. Every single time that he's had an opportunity to really pad the stats, fourth quarter games, they're getting blown out. They give him 6 receptions in the fourth quarter. They're just, right now, they're playing for Christian McCaffrey's numbers, it seems. So at 19.8, 20% ownership, my first crunch, I ended up right around, I had 22% of him. And I just like Zeke and other guys up there too. So I'm not going to get overwhelming McCaffrey, but if you did, there's nothing bad to say about it. I think he'll play his normal role, if not more, because of these records he's chasing.
I mean, 49 targets the last 4 games. So that's insane.
He caught 15 balls on 15 targets last week.
Yeah. And I mean, and then on top of that, I mean, he's getting at least 13, 14 rushing attempts in those games as well. So, I mean, you want to talk about NBA and how much we like the usage rate. I mean, my God, what is the usage rate on Christian McCaffrey here? Because that's just absolutely insane. And I think at 19%, I think it's kind of low. I think if you go 30, 35%, give yourself some leverage against the field. I don't mind that. I think people are just shying away from that 10K price point. But I think there's a lot of great value plays this week, and we'll get into that. But at 19%, man, I'm okay with that, and I'll probably be over the field immensely. Leonard Fournette is the next guy coming in the fifth spot at 16.9%. Got a matchup at home against Indiana. We talked about it yesterday, I believe, with Sal, or excuse me, with Manny, and just it's been a different type of volume game now with Fournette. It wasn't what we saw previously early on in the season, and on top of that, the red zone attempts are way down than what they were. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, the last 4 weeks, he's had 7 total red zone rushing attempts. But if you go back to earlier in the year, he was having 8 attempts in a game, 7 attempts, 8, 4, 4. Just constantly getting so much red zone opportunity. Wasn't scoring, all the time because he only had 1 touchdown out of all those attempts. But I will say this, though, is that he was getting 29 rushing attempts, 23, 20, 29, 20. Just constantly 20 plus, and then obviously involved in the passing game. Now we've seen that dip down. His cap has been 15 the last 4 weeks. What are your thoughts here on this play? And do you think this is the same type of volume play as it was previously earlier in the year?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think the biggest reason for a lot of this volume reduction is just probably a lot of blowouts for this Jacksonville team, especially in the second half of games. I think 4 out of the last 5 weeks they've lost by at least 2 scores. A couple of those weeks they lost by 3 or more scores. So it's tough to get Fournette going for a 20-plus carry game when you're just trailing by a touchdown or 2 in the third or fourth quarter. So I think that has a lot to do with it. They come in 3.5-point underdogs against the Colts in this one. So there's the chance they get blown out. Vegas is not projecting that. They rarely do project that in these types of situations. So I think I'm going to play Fournette straight up here. In a couple of those games, even where they were getting blown out, his passing game role has just stayed elite, only behind McCaffrey in targets and routes run for a running back, 4th most receptions. And the Colts give up the most receptions for the second straight year now, all of last year, all of this year now. Most receptions in the league, 101 to running backs this season. I think it's a good spot for Fournette with the price coming down. I have him projected currently for 20 total touches, 16 on the ground, and 4 receptions. And I could see that those receptions numbers being higher. So I have Fournette at 18% right now, so slightly above the field. I like him here. I think a lot of there is problems with the volume coming down. I think some of it's blowout, but I like to see that his targets, his volume are still staying at like a floor of 6 targets with the upside of 10.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned for FanDuel purposes. He's pretty high up there because where's he at? I believe he is about the 6th or 7th hole, coming in at 18.7%. The Colts, they've only surrendered 4 rushing touchdowns all season long. If you really look at kind of how they've played as a defensive unit, they've been pretty stout against the run to some degree. And that scares me for FanDuel purposes. Now, you mentioned the PPR and him being involved in the passing game. Yes, I think that's valuable for DraftKings, and it's much needed, way more than it is on FanDuel. But if he's not getting in the red zone, this definitely draws a red flag and a little bit of a concern to me. And I think I'd rather go elsewhere than to be that much on Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, because I could see a pretty safe floor of 3 receptions, and projecting him for 4 to 5 receptions is probably a given here. I have him for 4 right now, and yeah, it's a big difference when you're talking about DraftKings. That goes much further, where he's only $7,000. So if you were anywhere to fade him or come in below him, yeah, FanDuel for sure, more so than DraftKings.
One more guy we'll speak on as we round out these top projected owned players is Julio Jones, 8,500 going into Tampa Bay, 16.3%. Now, I think it was yesterday or the day before I mentioned, he's seen the end zone only twice this year, right? And that was both in the same game against San Francisco. And he's really only come on as of late with 2 really big games. And earlier in the season, to start the season, he was there as far as he was paying off his price. But here's the thing: is where do we go with Julio Jones, given the fact that how do you think he'll be involved in this passing game, and let alone this entire game? Does he stay on the field the entire time? Do you think he'll be heavily involved in the offense? Because Tampa Bay has been a little bit different defensively when it comes to the passing game over the last few weeks. And we saw that with how they shut down DeAndre Hopkins the week prior.
Yeah, they've been really good, much improved. Run defense has been solid all year, but the pass rush and secondary have come to be league average secondary and run defense is on the season, but if you just a lot of that is skewed. If you look at the past 6 to 8 weeks, they're actually a top 10 secondary Tampa Bay. So Carlton Davis and his safety will probably be on Julio. You look at Julio's usage; he's been limited this week with the shoulder and knee, but everything indicates that he's fully ready to go for this game. Usually is limited, misses a Wednesday practice each week for maintenance reasons, but 35 targets last 2 weeks without Ridley, 23 catches, 300 yards. Those two touchdowns you talked about against San Fran. He's looked fantastic. Now the price point's up there and it's matching it. I still think it's fine, though, to get there. I'll get to mainly Julio in these Atlanta stacks. I was surprised to see Matt Ryan right now projected for just 5% ownership, which means that a lot of this Julio ownership is not coming in a stack. So I'll get to maybe around 10% of Matt Ryan, get some Julio in there in most of those. But then at the price tag, I don't really feel the need to prioritize it as a one-off because now you're paying top dollar for it. But 16%, I actually probably come in a little bit below it. I'll get to a lot in stacks, and then maybe I come in around like 12%.
One interesting note, because he was on that huge drought from earlier in the year, and then he only found the end zone twice since week 4, and that was against San Fran. But you mentioned Matt Ryan being low owned, and you would think that if they're projected to be in a shootout or Julio's projected to also be going off, I mean, you would assume that maybe Matt Ryan would be higher owned as far as that correlation. But there is an interesting note here that a majority of the people are betting the over. However, the majority of the money is on the under. Do you take that into consideration as far as kind of how things have shifted throughout this week when it comes to this? I mean, this total is the second highest, I believe, on the slate. And so when you look at that, a lot of people gravitate to high over unders. They predict shootouts and they want to have a lot of shares from this game. But it's interesting because we have Julio Jones on one side, and on the other side of the ball, where does the scoring come from while we're on this game right now? Because yesterday, O.J. Howard was pretty high up there in ownership. He's dropped in the last 24 hours. You have Cameron Brate and O.J. Howard, and then you have Perryman and I guess Justin Watson, I guess you could say. But do you think this is a game that has shootout potential based on all these little nuances?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Both of their secondaries have been improving. Both of their pass rushes are definitely improving, and they both have decent run defenses. So I do think that it'll be through the passing game. The injuries on both sides of the ball to Ridley, to Evans and Godwin should lower somewhat of a ceiling. But even if it does hit the over where the money's going, the pros are going, or if it does hit the under, even if it goes for 46 to 47 points here total, it's still going to be the highest on projected game on the slate. It's just there's a huge drop off after this. And where the ownership's coming in, like on the rest of these players, I feel fine getting to it. It's a game that will feature a lot of points, or at least should project to feature a lot of points. And for some reason, you have Julio at 16%, and everything else is pretty much in single digits in ownership. So the price points are fine on a lot of these guys. You talk about the other side of it. I think the one price point that is maybe egregious, if anything, is Perriman at 6,700. But if you're making groups for this game, I would still keep him in there. I would prefer to get the most of Watson. The price point doesn't have to do a lot for you. Saw 10 targets last week, has been running for the past 2 weeks all the Mike Evans routes. Now Godwin being out, will just see more usage. So Watson is probably the guy I prefer from Tampa. O.J. Howard, I would rather get to similarly priced guys in his range before getting to O.J. Howard, like a Hunter Henry. But if you're playing groups, he would still be in there for me. So yeah, I would consider fading this one if it was being really highly owned. But for some reason, it's the highest projected total on the slate and not getting much ownership.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is there's so much expectation as far as scoring opportunities here, but no one is owned whatsoever. And so that's what confuses me is Julio Jones is the outlier here as far as ownership is concerned, but everyone else is, I mean, single digit percentile.
Yeah, I think like the 15 game slate definitely factors into that. You get just no ownership on Matt Ryan was really interesting to me because he's probably one of my top 3 quarterbacks to want to play this week, and nobody's on him. So it just makes it more appealing. I don't think we're missing anything. I think it's just a big slate. People are going elsewhere. Perriman is expensive, so stacking the Tampa Bay side becomes a little bit not something you want to do when you're trying to stack Watson and O.J. Howard. But when you still have Hooper and Julio on the Atlanta side and only have to run back one option on Tampa Bay side, I think it makes a lot of sense to want to get to that.
Let's talk about the Hargrave situation, because since Hargraves has been out, what has changed in this passing defense for the Bucs?
Yeah, so I mean, he was terrible. He was on the outside, then they moved him into the slot, and he was a real liability for them. So they end up cutting him. You've had Carlton Davis playing more on the outside. Probably going to see a safety with Julio here, but he's played more one-on-one and been very good over that time in one-on-one coverage. So the biggest thing for them was they got rid of a liability. Their pass rush improved, which was also big. And when you get a more stable pass rush, if not a good pass rush over the last top 10 over the last 2 months, 8 weeks, it just helps your secondary. So you rid of a bad defender, you move some things around. Carlton Davis has been playing better, and then your pass rush improves. And overall, you have a decent secondary to an improving secondary, top tier, top third of the league secondary over the last 2 months. So I think it's just a combo of the pass rush and kind of trimming some of the fat.
Atlanta Falcons defense has been somewhat different than maybe earlier in the year where we like to attack it a lot. And the passing defense has definitely stepped up as of late. They've only surrendered one touchdown through the air over the last 4 weeks. So my question to you is, what is your take on a leverage play and playing the Atlanta defense against a quarterback that, turns it over at a rapid rate?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. You saw it last week. Both sides, the defense and the quarterback, can have decent games when it comes to fantasy because of just 1 point being lost for interceptions, but the defense gets two with the upside. So, yeah, I think you're going to continue to see when Jameis leads the league in passing yards. Also, probably going to throw 30 touchdowns. I think it was Ben Rossa pointed out earlier in the week, 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions, be the first guy to do that and not get pulled out of any of these games. But it's also a spot where he will make these mistakes, and there's enough pressure now being generated from Atlanta. Throws the most in the league at 41 times per game. So, yeah, I think getting to Atlanta's defense, I think that's fine to do it. What are they? They're 3,400. They're like 1% owned. Yeah, I think, especially when they're lower owned, that's a fine spot.
Atlanta, 20 sacks over the last 6 weeks, 2 defensive touchdowns in that time. And they've forced, I believe, 13 or 14 turnovers, if I'm not mistaken. So things have changed from earlier in the season where, they didn't, I think there was a 4 or 5 week drought where they didn't have a sack. They didn't have a turnover forced. So you want to talk about a significant 360. 180. This is really something to look at and something interesting. They are 4,600 on FanDuel and they're 3,400 on DraftKings. So just something to take in consideration. But I like that 30 for 30 call. Do you think they'll do an ESPN documentary on that?
Maybe. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea.
All right. Before we get into some more stuff, don't forget, for all of you guys in here, if you can, please like, please subscribe, and don't forget to get notified when all these amazing shows do get aired. And we really appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to watch these shows, to support us, because without your continued support, we wouldn't be able to do this on a daily basis. And also, if you haven't signed up yet for Awesemo.com, you still can. You still can get 50% off your first month. Try it out. Maybe try it out for this last week of the season. Try it out for the playoffs. See if it suits you. See if you're benefiting from all the tools and resources from the number one player in the world himself, Alex Baker. And if you want to use the promo code NFL Strategy, go ahead and do so and get 50% off your first month. FanDuel. Let's look at this real quick. See if there's anyone that stands out. And this is interesting because yesterday, Alvin Kamara was, I believe, the number one owned player on DraftKings for ownership. He's now dropped, but on FanDuel, he's still up here. So let's talk about him real quick because, he's still somewhat relatively owned on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, he's definitely creeped up. How do we feel about, obviously, there's confidence in what we saw last week against Tennessee. He got into the red zone, or he got into the end zone twice, really kind of showed signs of the Alvin Kamara that we expect from a fantasy perspective. But coming in against Carolina, as we know, has a horrible rushing defense. How do we see Alvin Kamara this week being utilized, and will he replicate kind of what he did last week in this offense?
Yeah, so the 2 touchdowns is hard to project replication, but I think his overall usage will be similar. I have him projected for 18 touches, 13 carries, 5 receptions, and that's just a median. Not shocked to see that go up by 2 carries, an extra reception or 2. So, yeah, it's a spot for me where I have a little bit less than Kamara, but it's nothing against his play. If you had a lot, you were taking your stance by getting a ton of Kamara. I think that's completely fine. It's just right now where I'm coming in with McCaffrey and Zeke also up there for the Fournettes of the world, and some of the lower owned guys like Mixons and Chubbs. I'm a little bit over the field on there, so it's pulling down some of my Kamara ownership. I think it's completely fine. I like it a little bit more on DraftKings because of the PPR style. $7,900 on FanDuel at 24%. I'd probably still be, just the way I'm playing this week, I don't know, 4, 6, 8% less than that. But like I said, it's a smash spot. It's really at this point who you're prioritizing at the top end, and I'll prioritize Zeke a little bit more.
He looks healthy, man. Kamara looks a lot more healthier than he did earlier in the year. And also, what we saw earlier in the year was kind of like that split where we would see a lot of Latavius Murray. He's kind of been faded out now of the offense, not so much heavily involved as kind of what we saw earlier in the year. 25 snaps last week, 22 previously before that. But earlier in the year, I mean, obviously he started a couple games, but he was kind of utilized a little bit more. So it's kind of nice to see that Kamara is getting a little bit more of better opportunities as compared to previously. And he looks healthy. When he hit that hole for that big rushing touchdown, he just had that burst of speed that kind of we know that he has. So it's kind of nice to see that. And I think that should give any type of owner a little bit more confidence in wanting to roster him this week. But I agree. I think he's more valuable on DraftKings because of the PPR rather than FanDuel, because then again, it really is hard to get him into the end zone when you do have Mike Thomas, who does take a lot of that share in the offense.
Yeah, definitely. And then you also have, I mean, the last month or two when he's been healthy, Jared Cook seeing a lot of red zone usage as well, which usually was just this two-headed monster. Now Cook, at least around the red zone, is also becoming a factor there. But yeah, I mean, it's a smash spot for Kamara. You told me, or Kamara, if you told me you had 30, 35%, I wouldn't blink an eye at it. Carolina, it's a top 5 run blocking advantage for the Saints. Carolina, most yards per game now, even worse than Miami on defense. I wouldn't be shocked to see some of their players taking a little bit easy in terms of Kuechly's and guys in the middle of the field in this last game. So it's the Saints with a must-win spot. If they win, there's a decent chance that they end up getting a first-round bye. They would need either the Packers to lose or the Seahawks to beat the 49ers again on Sunday night. So they're going to be playing this one all out. You don't have to worry about them. I'll have around the field around 20% or so of Kamara, but if you add more, there's nothing bad to say about it.
I was told that my mic is peaking. Does that sound better?
It might translate differently for people watching, but you've sounded normal for me the whole time.
All right, yeah. I didn't. I'm not too sure. It wasn't. The volume's not even high up there. So my apologies if it's if it was a little bit louder. Another guy in a smash spot is Davante Adams, and he comes in here at the top 5 at Detroit, 20.4%. He's 8,400 on FanDuel. I really like him this week. I think. How do they stop Davante Adams? I mean, this secondary is so depleted for Detroit. I just think this is a smash spot for the passing game of the Packers. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it is too. Like even if people want to say that Darius Slay, even if he shadowed Adams for 60, 70% of this game, Adams, in my opinion, is just on another tier of the type of cornerback play compared to wide receiver play that Slay is. So yeah, even if Rodgers, they're huge favorites here, 12.5 points. So the concern is that Rodgers just throws 26 to 28 times. He's thrown 33 times per game this year, but you're getting a 40% market share of targets for Adams. So if you get 28 attempts, that's still 11 targets for Adams in this spot. So yeah, when you're talking about 20% ownership, I'm not that high on him. I think he's fine. Similar takes as to Kamara. You just have to prioritize it a little bit there. I would still prefer Julio at a similar price point, similar ownership too. But on FanDuel and even DraftKings, a lot of the ownership that people are going towards with Michael Thomas, I'm just factoring that and splitting it up between Julio, Adams, some of these top end receivers, and just not getting to a lot of Thomas. So yeah, 20% Adams. I'd have more Julio, but I think it's fine.
Can Detroit make this game competitive whatsoever?
No, I don't think so. Like you have no Marvin Jones. They have no Mike Daniels on defense. He was placed on IR, I believe, before last week. But either side of the ball is just depleted right now. Their backfield is going to be 3 guys trying to get it. It's a third string quarterback. This team was playing so well through the first month or two. They had a game come down to the wire against the Chiefs, and then just injuries to all of their big players, not named Kenny Golladay, have really depleted it. So Packers win the game. They get a bye. They need to win to get that number 2 overall seed. I think it's going to just be 12-point spread might be a little bit kind for Detroit.
All right. Other than that, I guess we'll just speak on Aaron Jones real quick because he does come in right after Davante Adams. Clearly had a monster game against the Vikings, ran all over them, had some really big runs. Do we think they go a little bit more conservative here and run? I mean, and also the question I think I would want to ask is, if they do go up big early and they do decide to run, how much take does Jamal Williams get then if that's the case?
So Jamal Williams was ruled out, I believe this morning. So
well, was he?
Yeah. So that was, so he was questionable. And there was not really much news. He was a limited participant, then didn't practice. So I like Aaron Jones, I think, on DraftKings more because he's already picking up the ownership on FanDuel, and it makes sense. Just he's more touchdown upside there, and that's what you want on FanDuel. 16 touchdowns, leads the league this year. But on DraftKings, he's only 8% owned. Jamal Williams was seeing around 12 touches per game. Now it's just going to be in the backfield. Tyler Ervin, who saw an end around last week, and that was about it. And Dexter Williams, a guy who, out of Notre Dame, a rookie, they didn't even want to play in the preseason because he didn't know the playbook and was fumbling. So this is a spot where those guys have like 15 combined, I think, snaps in the regular season. Aaron Jones is in a really good spot to see all the targets that Williams would usually see, 3 or 4 a game. You probably get Aaron Jones touching the ball 20 times on the ground and 4 to 5 targets in the air. It's just a really good spot. So I'll go to the spot where he's lower owned and still going to have reception upside since Jamal Williams is out on DraftKings at 8%. I think it's fine on FanDuel. You're just not getting an edge as you are in DraftKings. And again, the Lions are 25th against the run. No Mike Daniels, who the 1 month that he was in this season and healthy, they were actually a top 10 defense on the run during that span. Now with him out, it's a great spot for Jones. I think that he probably sees a total of 22 to 24 touches here.
Man, that kind of changes a lot if now he is ruled out, because I really liked him just in case. If that was the case and they went up big, they would probably use Jamal Williams a little bit more than they would Aaron Jones. But with really no one taken away from Aaron Jones here now, and I mean, he's going to have to be on the field immensely. What about also, I mean, they need to win this game. So it's a must win for them. And I mean, obviously, if it stays within a touchdown or two, I mean, then, we'll probably see a lot of target share going to Jones and Adams, really just vacuuming up all of that opportunity. So what about the stacking the Packers here in this game? Is that crazy to think? Or, I mean, could we see that little flair of Aaron Rodgers where he has had a couple big games this year outside of the 12, 13-point consistent games that he usually gives us?
Yeah, so the offense is, like you said, it's going to be so concentrated, as it has been all year. Like, you saw 9 targets last week on 40 attempts from Rodgers to Allen Lazard, but a lot of those are quick slants, and he's been very efficient there, but it's something that's hard to trust. My only concern with stacking this team is Aaron Jones will get more targets, but it doesn't correlate too well with Aaron Rodgers. It's a little bit more of a bump than you actually expect because of 2 really long receiving touchdowns this year against Dallas, one of them. So that's where correlation seems like it's a little bit more true, but it's skewed to a couple of plays. But even then, it's just really expensive. I mean, you have one of the highest priced running backs in receivers, but then you also have one of the highest priced quarterbacks. And at that point, you need them all to hit sort of ceilings. It's a game where they can do it, but it's 12.5-point favorites. I think I lean on Aaron Jones, then Adams, and more so as one-offs.
Aaron Jones is projected 8% right now on DraftKings. He's 8,200. Would you go there given that ownership?
Yeah, earlier he was at like 2 or 3%, and then I think so. I misspoke. Jamal Williams is doubtful still. I just looked at. I thought that update meant he was out, but so doubtful. We'll just say that 25% chance he actually plays now. But he was like 2%, 3%. Now he's up to 8%. I think that's like where it should be. I was coming in around 10% on him, so yeah, I would go there. But it's not a really strong stance for me. But 8,200. People are looking at Zeke at a similar price range and getting 4 times the ownership. That doesn't seem right to me. I think these guys can finish the day with very similar scores.
All right, let's get into some plays for position by position. And I mean, we can talk about, we'll start off with DraftKings, and I mean, we'll throw in some FanDuel there as well. But as we go into quarterback, I mean, who are your, I guess what we'll do is we'll do the same thing like we had before with the GBP, the cash game, and someone who maybe is under the radar that could be sneaky. So when it comes to the quarterback position, who are your top guys as far as GBP format?
Yeah, so I'll give you just guys that I like, and then I'll get into some of those sneaky ones. I like both sides of this Atlanta-Tampa Bay game, more so Atlanta. I like Matt Ryan a lot this week. And Tampa Bay, I like Winston just because he's going to throw a ton. And at that point, somebody's going to produce. You have a couple of guys you can key in on. It's not a great stack because of the prices, but I'll go Matt Ryan, Winston, and Dak Prescott as some of the guys I'm looking to the most. Sneakier plays, though, I think Daniel Jones and Baker Mayfield at quarterback stand out as lower-owned guys. The Eagles, they're without Ronald Darby. Jalen Mills, the other cornerback, is questionable, and all of the wide receivers are healthy. Daniel Jones is priced up, so he's low-owned because of the price, but I think it's a fine spot. And same thing for Baker in a really good spot against Cincinnati. Cincy, last time out, no passing touchdowns. There's a defensive score, a Kareem Hunt rushing touchdown, and a Baker Mayfield rushing touchdown against the Bengals. They're bottom 5 in the league in defense overall, both the run and the pass. So I think it's a good spot to get a lower-owned Baker.
Any love for Carson Wentz at 6,100?
Yeah, there's love there. He's probably, right now, he's like my 4th or 5th highest on stack. from that side of it. It's interesting because you're stacking like Wentz, Goddard, and Greg Ward, and that sounds terrible, and it really does, but it's so concentrated. It's cheap. It's a must-win game also, motivation in Week 17. And then it's a Giants defense that is bottom 3 in pass rush and secondary. So it's a good spot for Wentz. I'm kind of still struggling to see, like, I want to see what projected ownership comes out to like tomorrow morning, because we have like chalk, I guess you can say, quote unquote, the highest owned guy being Dak Prescott at 13%. I understand that can turn into a Zeke game. And you have Wentz, the second highest. I think the Eagles end up being the highest owned stack if you were to look at it. And it's crazy to think that like Greg Ward and Dallas Goddard are going to be the main pieces of that.
Let's talk about real quick 5,100 Robert Griffin, who's going to be starting this week. I personally, I mean, I don't think there's any upside here. I think they just run a ton. They get this game over with. And that's that. I mean, plus Pittsburgh has a lot to play for. They're going to throw the hammer at him with their defense, which is a very strong defense and a defense that I do like. But he's 5,100, and I could probably see people going there trying to flirt with him. But really, is there any upside with Robert Griffin here at 5,100?
No, I'm concerned to get there. And it reminds me of, it was like 6 years ago, Matt Flynn for the Packers stepped in Week 17, threw 6 touchdown passes against the Lions as a backup and just broke all the slates. But like, I don't think that's the position we're dealing with here. You have Robert Griffin, who is more so, he still has the mobility, but not as much as he did because of the injuries. And it's a Steelers defense that has just been stout. Their pass rush is elite, top 5, overall defense top 5. And the Steelers are playing for something. They're playing for a potential wild card spot if they can get a victory. So, yeah, it's not a spot I want to go to Robert Griffin. You have maybe Kyler Murray sitting out. So some of the other options for filling quarterbacks, Brett Hundley, he's picking up ownership. I think he's like third highest right now. I don't have interest there. I mean, he's just not a good quarterback. He showed a little bit last week, but I'm not too interested. If like overnight news from Adam Schefter tomorrow morning is that Jared Goff's just not going to suit up because there's been rumors. If you had somebody like Blake Bortles stepping in to play against Arizona, that's a spot that would actually go to a backup quarterback. But these other guys, I don't have interest right now.
2 other guys I think are somewhat valuable this week that are low owned that do have to pay for, but I don't mind it. Drew Brees, he's coming in at sub 5% right now against Carolina. I think there's a lot of opportunity there as far as a leverage play is concerned. And I really do like Aaron Rodgers. I think what we're going to see is maybe a lot of passing early. And I mean, if they're connecting and getting in the end zone, I think he will pay off. But I mean, it's just such a good matchup. And typically what I like to do is I like to attack players in really good matchups that have talent. That are low owned. And I mean, these are the plays for GPP purposes. So I don't mind sprinkling a few shares of those 2 guys come someday.
Yeah, and I think that's fine, especially when they're 2 of the better just quarterbacks in the better offenses in the entire league. So yeah, that makes sense.
Running back is very interesting. I'm really excited to hear kind of your takes on where we're at. But I guess, give us your top plays and then go into the sneaky ones that maybe people aren't seeing right now.
Yeah, so top plays, a lot of them will be obvious, maybe not a couple of them though. So I like at the top, this is going to be very important on Lesean Mccoy news. There's been some sources saying that he'll be active for this one. He was a healthy scratch for the second time last week because of just prepping him for the playoffs, colder weather, and aging veteran. They just want his body healthy for the playoffs. So if he's a healthy scratch again, I'm going to get to probably the most Damien Williams on this slate. He is currently at 4,700. He's seen 24 and 19 total touches in the 2 games where McCoy was healthy scratch this year. It's hard not to like 18 to 20 touches out of a guy in a Kansas City offense that they are playing for something. During that game, there's probably no chance, small chances that the Patriots lose to the Dolphins, but they're going to be playing at the same time. If the Patriots were to lose and the Chiefs win, they end up getting a first round bye. So there's a chance. And if the Chiefs end up losing and the Texans win, they get bumped to the 4 seed. So there's some movement that can happen. It's unlikely, but I think it means that the starters play at least 3 quarters, probably the whole game. So if Damien Williams is indeed, or if McCoy's out, Damien Williams will be my highest owned play. But then after that, I like Zeke, McCaffrey, Kamara, Fournette are all kind of grouped together for me. And then another guy that I like who is honestly a priority for me right now, like 15% owned, might come in more, but not getting ownership, is Sony Michel at 4,900. So those are some of the running backs I like.
Took my play.
yeah, it's a good spot.
Right. I mean, it is. And, let's talk about him real quick. He's 4,900, but the matchup is great. And I think where we need to focus is the last 2 weeks. 40 rushing attempts, involved in the passing game just a little bit. And, last week he had 4 red zone rushing attempts alone. And that's kind of what we saw earlier in the year where he was sometimes paying off as he was getting in the end zone. But, this is a game where I think they're going to have to just run a lot. They're going to want to just, ground and pound. Their defense is going to play big. There's not going to be a lot of probably mobility from Tom Brady. And I could just see Sony Michel really eating in this situation. He's 4,900. And for 4,900, if he's going to get 20 plus carries and maybe a couple catches, how do you not roster him at that price point?
Yeah, it's a good price point. If Damian Williams is in, I will have much more Williams. But at 7% ownership, I'm coming in like double the field right now. You get a 16.5-point favorite. Great matchup. And another thing that I think is important, you've seen these last 2 weeks when the Patriots have been pretty much leading. He's seen 40 total touches on the ground. Last week, or week 2 against Miami, went for 21 touches. So I think that's interesting to me. Julian Edelman's injury, he's been on record, and I've said it a couple times, to say that if it wasn't the end of the year, if they weren't fighting for a first-round bye, that he would have missed a couple of weeks at this point. He only played 70% of the snaps last week. Per game. So I do think that that means something. I think that Edelman in a blowout here, already being limited, might see 50% of the snaps. He's the only other viable person in this passing game for the Patriots. So I think they lean very heavy on the run here, and that usually means Sony Michel for 20 plus touches. So I have Michel right now projected for 18 carries and a reception, just to try and get it a little bit higher. But I'm not shocked to see like a 24 touch game, and at 4,900, he's just going unnoticed in a good spot.
Their run implied total is 31 points.
Yeah.
This is the highest out of any team. The touchdowns have to come from somewhere. And we're going to see it. This is a really tough spot for the Dolphins to try to make it competitive. Although I do think late in the game they might cover because it is such a big spread, and I wouldn't be surprised if Fitzpatrick does something to make that happen. But when you really look at this game and the way that the game flow could go, Sony Michel bodes well for it. And I'm not worried about Rex Burkhead. I think Sony Michel is someone that you can count on to at least get to 20 touches. I really think that they're changing how they're kind of utilizing him now. They're going back to how they utilized him earlier in the year. And this is a great spot to see kind of that extra run. And at 4,900, I really do like it. It's a really great matchup for him. Anyone can run on the Dolphins, so I don't mind it. Another guy I want to speak of is Ronald Jones. He's 4,900 against Atlanta. He's someone who he's inconsistent, but I will say that he is getting really good production out of him as far as just the touches for his price point. He's also involved in the passing game. So for DraftKings, I really do like this. And I want to ask you, with Godwin and Evans out now, don't you feel like Ronald Jones is kind of more of a priority as far as being utilized in the offense?
So I think he should be, and we haven't seen OJ Howard's role change in these past couple of weeks all that much. If anything, it's just Brate's changing, and then
is he good? Do you think OJ Howard's good?
I'll say yeah, still just based off of what we saw last year and times this year, but I don't know. I don't know if it's just a usage thing. We came into the year with the whole Arians doesn't like to use tight ends, and it seems like that's the case. But I think he's good. It's just his role isn't changing. Brates is, and then these other receivers clearly are, because Perriman and Watson and Hyman have to step in. But it's just hard for me to really want to recommend or trust Ronald Jones, where we've seen it 2 or 3 other times this year. He seems like a workhorse or a guy seeing 8 more touches, and then the next week it's an even touch split. It's Peyton Barber getting 6 more touches. So yeah, if I was to play a Tampa Bay back, it would be Jones, and he's a cheap price point. But relative to like Michel, Damian Williams, maybe even Justice Hill, I think I'm just going to get to those guys more.
And one more guy that's here, that's in the cheap range, is you spoke on him quite a few times this season. But Le'Veon Bell, he's 5,800. I think this price point is more than appealing. And they're going to be going up against Buffalo. But here's the thing, is how much of the first unit will this Jets offense see?
Yeah, so I think on the offensive side, not much. Like they've already said, they're probably not going to play a lot on the offensive side, which means the Jets stay into the game. They probably get a lead and run more, so that's good for Bell. The defensive side, yeah, they could be sitting some starters there as well. Usually defense goes out later in the game if they do it all. The defensive line would be the first ones out, then secondary pieces. So, yeah, I think if anything, it just helps Bell, no doubt about it. He's at a price point where I think he makes for a very good cash play, maybe more than GPP. But that being said, he's fine in GPPs. It's just that you feel pretty locked in for Le'Veon Bell getting you like 10 to 12 points, and that's great in cash at the price point. And then at that point, if you get the touchdown out of him, it's a really bad offensive line. That's the only reason why it's still a concern. It's been one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Stuff percentage is high for Le'Veon Bell. But again, at this price point, you are one touchdown away from no matter what he's paying off for you. So that's why I like him a lot in cash.
46 rushing attempts the last two games. His last game against Pittsburgh, the most rushing attempts of any game this season. Saw 4 targets, 4 catches. And also, don't forget, they played Buffalo earlier in the year. I think it was the first or second game of the season. He scored 23 DraftKings points, had 17 rushing attempts, 60 yards, and he had 6 catches. So at 5,800 now, we're not only getting a huge discount, but if he's 5,800 and he's seen 20 plus rushing attempts and he's going to get involved in the offense with the passing game to some degree, I really like this. I think this could be somewhat of an intriguing play, and he's sub 10% right now. He's projected 7% on DraftKings. So with the PPR, I really like him for that.
Yeah. I think that at the price point, it's hard to ignore at that point.
Wide receivers got a mix of a lot of low price guys. Where are we going at here as far as your top priority?
Yeah, so top priorities and then some of the lower owned guys that I like. Julio at the top is fine to pay up for. He's probably my favorite pay up option. I did like Hopkins because he wasn't getting any ownership, but now the fact that the line has moved 3.5 points in favor of the Titans, indicating that you might see some guys sit for Houston, maybe Hopkins and Watson being the main guys. And Hopkins hasn't been practicing with an illness all week, so it's a little bit too risky for me now at that price point. He's dropped to like a secondary interest at best. So Julio, Keenan Allen, both of the Dallas Cowboys wide receivers. So I mentioned it. You have all their cornerbacks are done for Washington, top 3 or 4 guys. Aaron Colvin's going to be starting. He was cut by the Texans earlier this year. He's been a bottom 5 cornerback on the season. In bottom 8, so slight improvement over the last 8 weeks. He'll get Amari. And then you have no Landon Collins. So it's just a really good matchup for all the Cowboys receivers. Jarvis Landry, I like at that price point of 5,900. And then some of the sneaky type plays that aren't picking up ownership. Golden Tate's barely getting any ownership against Philadelphia. He'll face Avonte Maddox in the slot. His price point dropped about almost $1,000 because Eli Manning was starting. Daniel Jones came back last week and 11 targets went right back to Golden Tate, 6 catches, 90 plus yards. In games where Daniel Jones has started, there's been at least 10 targets into the slot in all but one of them. You have almost every single snap coming from Golden Tate out of the slot, and he's only 5,100 this week in a good matchup. So I like Golden Tate a lot. And then A.J. Brown, $7,000. It's really easy to kind of just want to get away from him at that price point. But he faced Lattimore last week. That's a spot you're expected not to do well in the passing game. Had a long rushing touchdown. But it's a must-win game. You're going to get Derrick Henry back, which means more play-action passing. And I believe Bradley Roby is questionable, and it seems like he's leaning more towards doubtful. That's the best defensive back for the Texans. That only helps A.J. Brown. So if the guy's at like 2-3% ownership right now, I'm fine getting there in some lineups.
Love the Golden Tate call. 5,100 against a very weak Philadelphia secondary. And I was on a different podcast yesterday, and I chose the Giants to win straight up. With Ertz out and them being on the road and with the way Daniel Jones played last week, I feel like they want to play spoiler. And I feel like this is going to be a difficult situation as far as their offense is concerned. If they're flying on all cylinders and they're able to pass the way that they have the last couple games, I think Philadelphia could be in trouble.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think like 1 out of 3 times the Giants usually win this game, but it gets even more risky when Zach Ertz isn't playing and all the wide receivers and the entire offense, aside from Ingram, but it's been all season, is healthy for the Giants. So yeah, it's a very scary spot right now for the Eagles, what they're going in there with. I think as they should be, they're still the favorites, but it's not a guaranteed lock. I think, a third of the time the Giants probably win this game.
One guy that was very interesting to see yesterday was Jarvis Landry. He was coming in as the 3rd highest owned player on DraftKings. He was plus 20-something%. Now he's sub 8%. He's at 7.9 currently. And we talked about it yesterday he said that he's going to need hip surgery. All this talk about, how disgruntled, the wide receiver core is and this offense is with the team and the organization. But one thing to take note that's kind of interesting is we were talking about incentives for contracts. And I think Jarvis Landry is almost at the 1,000-yard mark. And so just to throw this out there as a topic, are there any players this week that are playing for something for just individual purposes that can be taken note of, or should that even be considered when it comes to projections or anything when rostering these guys?
Yeah, I think it definitely should be considered. I actually haven't looked into this. I remember doing the show earlier this week and wanting to go back and look into any of the major incentives or the main records like McCaffrey's chasing. But yeah, I think going back and looking at incentives is pretty big. I mean, if you're playing for something like a sack on the defensive side or on the offensive side, 6 receptions for an extra million and half a million in your bonuses, yeah, I think that is one of the biggest motivational things, way more than the revenge narrative type stuff. So I haven't looked at it yet. It's probably something that I'm making note of right now to go back and look at a little bit. It's hard to factor that into projections other than just like manipulating manually a projection. That seems a little bit scary to do, but yeah, I think there's definitely increased motivation if you're that much money's on the line for just having an extra couple of receptions. I do like Landry, even if incentives are not at that price point. It's a good spot for a guy who's just playing a ton of snaps, has a ton of this target share in the red zone, which is something you usually haven't seen from him. And not only is it slot snaps and slot targets, but they're not just short 5-6 yards. They're on average around 12 yards down the field. And that's really good for a slot receiver. So I think Landry's fine. The 21, 22%, I'm happy it's come down a little bit because, yeah, I was around like the 14, 15% range on him.
One guy that's probably exceeded all incentives already, Mike Thomas. He's probably my top priority this week. I love this offense from the Saints, and I really love Michael Thomas. He is an incredible route runner, and that's why he is unstoppable. And I mentioned it yesterday of how beautiful he runs his routes. That just makes any cornerback look silly. But no matter what type of defensive scheme you throw at him, he's able to get open. He has amazing hands. And I think he's just going to absolutely crush this record that he just did this past week. And he's going to add more to it this weekend against Carolina. He's only 15% owned, and I know you have to pay up. But here's the thing, though, is this the week where you're going to be paying down a lot at wide receiver rather than paying up?
Yeah, I think there's a really strong mid range, and yeah, right now like my main priorities is Julio, and then a lot of 5 and 6K wide receivers, whether it's Keenan Allen, Amari, Landry, Odell, Gallup, all those guys. So yeah, I think you're paying to the mid range, if not paying all the way down to 4 or 5K range. And at this point, I think running back is a lot more stacked at the top end from 6,500 and above than you get at wide receiver. So yeah, I think so.
One guy that really stands out for me and love to get your take on him is John Ross. He's 4,500. He's going to be at home against Cleveland. We saw 13 targets last week, and I know they were down, and I know that they needed to throw late in the game, but still 13 targets, and he played 71 snaps. And I think that's the biggest note is that he ran a lot more routes. He was on the field the majority of the time as compared to the previous couple weeks since he's been back from the injury. How do you feel like he'll fare out this week against Cleveland at home?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting spot. He's in a player pool for me right now. He's coming in like a lot of my run backs of Cleveland stacks to start the week, but maybe getting a couple more shares of him isn't a bad idea. He played a full-time role last week. Wouldn't project 13 targets, but projecting somewhere around 7 or 8 it feels safe and good. And you get Andy Dalton in the games he's played this year. He's throwing 40.4 times per game. Now, as of late, Mixon's touching the ball a ton, 23 and a half times over the last 8 games. But this team they play quick. They run a lot of plays, and Dalton's fine chucking the ball. So I actually think John Ross is fine at that price point. He's one of those lower pay down options that makes a lot of sense to me. He's currently in a player pool. If at a very similar price point, I do prefer Greg Ward, but so does the ownership. And then Christian Kirk, if Kyler Murray was to play, which it leans like he doesn't seem like he's going to, I would prefer Christian Kirk since Jalen Ramsey's out against him. But yeah, John Ross is right now a guy that I have about 4 or 5% of.
Who are any of the guys that maybe are hashtag preseason or some guys that are going to get some extra run this week that can just really go off and they're so cheap but you'll know that they'll be involved in the passing game. Anyone there that has shown up in your player pool at wide receiver?
I'm trying to look through it right now. Like just for this specific week that we haven't seen all year long. No, there's really nobody that's showing up from the preseason because I think there's like it's week 17. There's uncertainty. I think there's like 3 or 4 teams that will just flat out sit guys. The Vikings seem very content with doing that. The based on the line movement for the Texans, it seems like they might be doing that. But I don't think any of these guys that were down the depth charts, like you've already had Justin Watson was in the preseason, but we all already know about him from Tampa Bay. Nobody else really stands out for me that much. Greg Ward wasn't really active in the preseason, but we all already know about him from the past couple of weeks. So, yeah, on my rosters right now, nothing from preseason guys at wide receiver really stand out. I think if you were to look anywhere, you would look at Minnesota, but with a backup wide receiver or quarterback in there, I don't really want to be taking my chances on. They're not even preseason guys, but Busy Johnson and Laquan Treadwell at that point. If anything, Treadwell maybe stands out a little bit because of how cheap he is, but you're getting a backup quarterback with just Laquan Treadwell's skill set. It doesn't seem that great.
Just a couple guys that are just min priced that who knows if they'll be utilized, but Javon Wims, Zay Jones, Jacoby Myers. I mean, a lot of these guys, Laquan Treadwell, like you mentioned, and even Alex Erickson at 3,600. Some guys that, I mean, could be potentially sprinkled in from some of these top guys in the industry just for GBP punts. That would probably open up roster space for McCaffrey or Thomas. But outside of that, though, I do feel like the mid-range just holds a lot of value. And I think that's probably the way to go outside of maybe Michael Thomas or Davante Adams. But if you do go cheap at running back, you could keep in mind that you could go Adams, Julio, and Mike Thomas if you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, if you get that, I mean, that would be loaded. If you get no Lesean Mccoy, it really opens up Damian Williams, and it makes it really easy to get to a Williams, a Sony Michel, and then tight ends naturally easy to get cheaper at. So yeah, I think I'm probably on different sides of it than you this week, and it's just a spot I've been at all season, just with Thomas when he's really expensive, and I think I'm gonna have 0%. It sounds scary. It sounds really scary.
What? 0% Thomas?
Yeah, so when he was 9,900 last time, I had 0%. The two other times he was 9,300, I had like around 4 to 5%. And like last time out, he's been bowling out every time. He scores 34, 29, and 28. The three other times he's been 9,300 or more on a main slate. Last week he was needed in some winning lineups, not all of them though. But the two previous times where he scored 30, 29, and 28, he wasn't needed in any of the top 10 winning lineups. And it's not because he's bad. It's just at that price point, it's hard to smash the slate if you're not going for like a 35 plus performance. So like he can go for 30 and he can do really well for you and just not harm me, because at that price tag, it's hard to be necessary, I guess I'll say.
So let's talk about this just for 1 second. So New Orleans right now is the 3rd seed, right? And so they need Green Bay to lose, and then they need to go ahead and win. But also, though, if San Fran loses and they win,
they're the 1 seed.
Right. So like there's so much to play for here. And I can only imagine that this offense just comes out in fireworks. I'm not seeing Carolina do anything defensively to stop them. I just can't see it. I could be wrong, but I mean, I just think this is a smash spot for Mike Thomas in this offense. And that's why I like Breeze. I don't mind pairing Breeze and him. And I mean, even Kamara, I think this offense is being somewhat underlooked to some degree when having them all together as a collective unit. But I mean, hey, to each his own. I understand the fade. I get it. Maybe in higher stakes, it's a little bit more of a play rather than, the Millie Maker or like the smaller slant, things of that nature. But tight end is a position where I feel like there's only 2 or 3 options this week. I think Tyler Higbee, I think Goddard, and maybe a little bit of Kelsey is kind of where I want to go. Are you looking outside anywhere else at the tight end position?
Yeah, so I like those 3 guys. I think I have a little bit less interest in Kelsey this week just because I'll get a lot of ownership on Goddard. Higbee seems fine. There's some risk there on Jared Goff, but if we don't get any more information, it's just your risk aversion at that point. I think I'll play it straight up, at least for Higbee. And then I like Austin Hooper a lot. The price point's high, so the ownership's low, and it's probably a little bit too high, the price point, but not enough to get more than where the ownership's coming in. And I mentioned earlier that Matt Ryan's going to be one of my higher owned quarterbacks, so higher owned stacks, and he's just a clear stacking option behind Julio at 5,800. I like Hooper. So yeah, I think for me right now, I'd rank it probably Goddard, Higbee, Hooper, and then Travis Kelsey. Some shares of a low-owned Darren Waller, really tough matchup, is fine. And then like your very low-owned shares of guys like Jonnu Smith is cheap and lower-owned, guys like Caden Smith. But yeah, it's going to be a really tight core of 4 or 5 guys at the top.
So I'm looking real quick because you mentioned Waller, and I just want to see the implications for playoff opportunity for the Oakland Raiders. Yeah. And they still can make the playoffs.
Yeah, they needed 5 things to happen last week, and they all happened. They need 5 more this week.
That's insane, man. So
yeah, and 2 of the things are maybe not very likely, but if they win, that they control that. And then they need you're looking at it. So, but they need one of the top 4 teams, like the Patriots, to beat Miami. So then they really just need 3 things to happen if they win.
So here's what they need. They need the Titans and Steelers to both lose, and then they need the Colts to beat the Jaguars. If those 4 outcomes happen, the Raiders will make the playoffs.
Yeah, so the problem there is the Steelers can definitely lose to even the backups of Baltimore. The problem there is based on the spread movement for the Texans, it very much seems like the Texans are probably going to rest starters because it went from a 3-point spread to a 6.5-point favorite for the Titans.
But still, I don't think the Titans are that good.
I think that they play a very interesting. They play a very strict way. They pound the ball, and Tannehill's been the most efficient quarterback probably in the league this year, just because of play action passing. So yeah, there's a real chance. It's better than no chance right now for them.
You imagine the Raiders make the playoffs, That's
Well,
just
yeah, like 2 weeks ago, I was saying because I mean they needed all this stuff to happen and they needed to continue winning the final 3 weeks and they've won 2 of them. I was just saying that they're virtually eliminated. Like they shouldn't be running Josh Jacobs out there, and then they ran him out there, and I was shocked. But I guess they saw this coming.
God, that's incredible. Um, I'm looking at here at tight end. I'm just trying to see if there's anyone else that maybe we should speak of. But I think, with these lower price tight ends, I mean, I think it's just a plug and play. But I don't think they hold so much value as the guys that we already mentioned. We can go on to defense now, and obviously it's the most volatile position. I spoke about Atlanta defense earlier in the show. I really think that there's some opportunity there with how much Jameis Winston turns over the ball and how great the Atlanta defense has been playing and applying pressure over the last 5 weeks. Who is in your player pool as far as defenses that maybe we should just take note of? Chicago's 2,100 against maybe the backups of Minnesota. That's very interesting, Sal.
Yeah. Chicago's in there right now. Atlanta I have some shares of. You get the Packers as a chalky defense. I hate playing even on a 15-game slate, just a highly owned defense, but it's as good of a spot as it gets. Packers, they pressure the third most in the league, and they bring the blitz the third fewest. So with one less man, they're getting there more than pretty much the entire league. That's how good they are with their front fours, Adarius and Preston Smith. So 12-point favorites against David Blau. I think that 15% ownership is clearly high, but they will be my highest owned team. So the Bears and Packers, they're the two highest owned defenses. I really don't want to have my exposures be like 50, 30% as they're projecting right now combined for those two defenses. So I'll just spread it out. I'll have Bears, I'll have Packers. I like the call on Atlanta. And then finding other spots where some of these backups might sit. Like if you do get Blake Bortles starting for the Rams, I really still don't want to get to Arizona. I think that's just still a nice spot to get the Bortles, if anything. So yeah, after those top end defenses, I'll just spread it out a bit. Another spot that I do like, even if they sit starters, paying all the way up for teams like the Patriots and teams like the Bills in these tournaments, if you have the money, makes sense to me.
I want to speak about Green Bay defense and maybe Pittsburgh defense for a second. They're both 3K. And I think they both have great opportunities to just smash in these spots. Pittsburgh defense really is such an underrated defense. But, I mean, they haven't surrendered past 21 points in the last 8 games, I believe. And they've only given up 20-plus points one time in the last 7 games. They apply a lot of pressure. They force a lot of turnovers. And, I mean, who knows what RG3 is going to be able or be capable of doing against a Pittsburgh team that has so much to play for in its own right. So I really like Pittsburgh there. And then Green Bay, too. I mean, what they did with a 3-man rush against Minnesota was just absolutely incredible. They've been another team over the last 4 weeks that has surrendered past 13 points one time. They've had, I think it's 3, if I'm not mistaken, 15 sacks over the last 5 games. And they're also forcing turnovers. So, I mean, this is a great spot for them. Detroit really has just really crumbled as an organization. And I think this is another opportunity for Green Bay to showcase this defense as well. So those two in Chicago and I think even Atlanta, I think all should be considered. But outside of that, I'm not sure if I have too much exposure. I'm sure outside of that, the rest of the defenses I'll just have sprinkled in.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good call. Pittsburgh, the concern is like the Ravens just run so much, but maybe the scheme changes a little. And even if they run so much, it's much worse players there as backups. So a lot of upside and a must win for them.
Well, that's it, man. Before we close out, who is your one guy that you think will be on the Millie Maker winning lineup to close out the NFL season?
Golden Tate.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to go with Sony Michel.
Sounds good.
I'm gonna go with Sony Michel.
I like that too, yeah.
But outside of that, guys, that's it for final thoughts. Week 17, the NFL DFS strategy show, awesemo.com, presented by our wonderful sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Don't forget to go ahead and sign up at Yahoo and use the code Awesemo. And don't forget, 50% off your first month with Awesemo if you haven't signed up yet to use all the tools and resources that Sal uses, that I use, created by the number 1 player in the world himself, Awesemo Alex Baker. Outside of that, guys, have a wonderful weekend. Crush this final Week 17 slate of the NFL season. It's been a pleasure, Sal, man. It's this was a fun 17 weeks.
Yeah, it went by really quick, man. We've done all these shows together on Saturday, really quick. Hopefully we get to do some in the playoffs.
Yeah, man. Hopefully we got some playoff shows coming up. Outside of that, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, continue to get notified and continue to support us. We really appreciate all you guys that support us. But outside of that, good luck this weekend. And Sal, where could we go ahead and find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter if you want to follow me there at Sal Vetri DFS. I'll be on today also here on the YouTube channel for Awesemo at 2 o'clock with Awesemo, Alex himself, and then Chris Spags talking some contrarian plays for Week 17. I also have my own YouTube channel, just Sal Vetri, if you want to check out more fantasy content.
All right, guys. Well, good luck tomorrow. Play good players. Someone take something down, and we appreciate all you guys.